Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Giving Tuesday chat. We are excited to be here in the midst of what has been a tremendous day, a day that is far from over, and a day that has proven to everyone that Giving Tuesday is a community, and a community that rallies and supports and teaches and inspires. I'm here with Henry Timms, who's joining for this hangout. My name is Aaron Sharinian. I'm talking to you today from the UN Foundation headquarters in Washington, D.C., and what we thought we'd do today is spend a couple of minutes sharing with you some stories about some things that have come across our view, some things that we've been able to see first person singular, and more importantly, I think, talk about some things we might see over the next few hours. With that, it's a pleasure to introduce and pose the first question to Henry Timms. Hi, Henry.
Hello.
You know, Henry, you have been witnessing Giving Tuesday from the very beginning. Indeed, it's something that started with your household, and I thought it would be important today for us to ask you. Last year I was in the same city as you during part of Giving Tuesday, and this year I've been dying to ask you some of these questions. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take advantage of this hangout and ask you, Henry, what has jumped out at you? What have you seen today in Giving Tuesday 2014? And what is something that you want to make sure that people are aware happened as we've gone through this first part of the day?
So I think we've seen a lot of really creative campaigns, right? I think one of the things, Giving Tuesday is just over 2 years old, and we've been learning a lot, I think, as a community over the last 2 years. And a lot of organizations who, in years 1 and 2, really just kind of did a very quick campaign. People have had a bit more time to really do some planning for what they're going to do. And I think in many cases that has really paid off in some meaningful ways. So we see things like good examples of the JED Foundation. The JED Foundation have been working with Giving Tuesday for a couple of years, and they've really used it as a way of thinking about getting their whole organization working more thoughtfully around digital and new donors and how they connect. And they've already met their match for Giving Tuesday. So it's really great to hear stories like that. But it's also I think, really good to see some very ambitious stories. So, you know, CrowdRise this year planned this big sort of augmented reality tower, which was trying to build a digital tower, which showed all the donations made on the day. It's an amazing experiment that they've tried to try and actually track what giving looks like in real time for a new generation. So I think we're seeing a lot of creativity. I think the story people aren't telling is about local. All right? I think actually what's really interesting is there are lots of very local activations on Giving Tuesday, which often aren't much to do with new technology at all. They're often really to do with people getting together in person for coat drives, for blood drives, for volunteering, for making donations as part of a community, for shining a light on local nonprofits. I think there's really a local story around Giving Tuesday this year, which we haven't seen in quite the same way as we have this year, which is about people giving where they live. And I think that's going to be a really interesting idea for Giving Tuesday moving forward. And I think we've also seen some kind of surprise and delight. CVS this year surprised 50 organizations with $2,000 grants. Unexpected, no one expected them coming, $52,000 grants, which for many of the small nonprofits they're dealing with is such a meaningful contribution to the work they're trying to do around the country. So we saw some really kind of big, interesting surprises too. So it's been a day of a lot of big stories. As I say, there's many hours, you know, over 6 hours left on the East Coast, over 9 hours left to go on the West Coast. So there's a lot of Giving Tuesday left. But I think as we stand right now, if our goal was to have a great kickoff to the giving season, my analysis is so far so good.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more, Henry, and I think that as Giving Tuesday around the globe has woken up in various time zones, and as the day has emerged, I think we've seen that conversation evolve and emerge as well. You mentioned here on the East Coast we're in a transition moment. A lot of people are getting in their cars and are on their way home and are going to be talking to their families, and that is, in a lot of ways, the start of the most exciting part of Giving Tuesday. I think you're going to see a lot of families talking around the dinner table, some people you know, cozying up with the people that they love in their lives, or talking to friends on the phone, or interacting with people after work. And I think you're going to see that conversation start about how Giving Tuesday has been something that you can do with people and friends from around the world and causes around the world, but also those very, very local things. Your comment reminded me of a story I heard today. A woman was on social media talking about Giving Tuesday, something that she wasn't aware of, I don't think, in the past. And she made a contribution to a global cause related to global health, and at the same time realized, hey, it's Giving Tuesday, I'm going to pay for the 2 or 3 people behind me in line at Starbucks. So everything from the very big donations that we've heard about, hundreds of thousands of dollars, matching gifts from big philanthropy leaders, all the way down to these people who decided giving won't just be my donation today. I'm also going to be kinder. I'm going to take advantage of this rallying, the start of the giving season, to really give back. And I think we're going to see more of those stories as they evolve. Henry, tell us a little bit something, because obviously you've been watching the world and Giving Tuesday around the world, but on that local theme, tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing there in Manhattan, in New York. 92i obviously is an important part of that island. Tell us what you've been seeing there locally.
Yeah, so I think we had the Chief Service Officer of New York City here today at the Y to proclaim it formally Giving Tuesday in New York on behalf of the mayor. And I think what we've managed to do is capture a lot of the attention and the actions of people, which typically would have been all about retail, right? So I think one of the things we've always been thinking about around Giving Tuesday is how do we shift attention from shopping to giving? How do we make that shift? And I think we've really seen that happen quite a meaningful way today. But I think the really interesting thing about Giving Tuesday is a lot of people would have felt like Giving Tuesday was everywhere today. But we still have such a relatively small market share in terms of where I think we're capable of going. Even with all the enthusiasm we've seen around it today, we spoke to a lot of people today, donors, to our donors to us here at the Y, who we called today on Giving Tuesday. And actually, we learned that a lot of them still haven't heard about Giving Tuesday. So I think what's really interesting is, for all the progress we have made, we have a long way to go in terms of really optimizing and maximizing the opportunity we have here in really giving the strongest possible start to the giving season.
One of the things that we learned early on in the day, and I'd like to give you a chance to tell folks about it. I haven't had a chance to talk with you about it one-on-one, but I read with interest the first, I think it was the first tweet at least that I read on the East Coast about a gift there at the 92i. What did that teach you, and what is it taught you about the Giving Tuesday moment?
So we were really, I mean, obviously we've been involved with the UN Foundation from the start in building Giving Tuesday, but we also, it took us, we had a pretty good year with our campaign last year, but this year we really had more time to think about how we could carefully use Giving Tuesday to get the people who care about our organization more engaged in the work that we do. So we announced at 1201 $1 million gift, which made up from a lot of the people who love the Y the most. And we're now challenging our community on Giving Tuesday and throughout the rest of the season to match that donation. So we hope we'll raise, we've already raised over $1.2 million. We will raise $2 million over the next month. And it was a really powerful way for us of a lesson I think a lot of us have learned about Giving Tuesday, which is planning the kind of advanced strategy is essential, but also planning the after strategy, right? So what are you doing up until Monday? And then what are you doing from Wednesday onwards? Those are key parts of the Giving Tuesday conversation. And I think one of the things we're going to see is a lot of organizations both doing very well today on the day, but also the ripple effect they're going to see over the coming month is going to be significant.
What are some of the tips? Because Giving Tuesday has been a community that shared a lot of learning, so I think it's very in the spirit of Giving Tuesday to share those. So what are some of the tips or the lessons learned that you could share about what an organization should be doing after a day that's a rally or a surge like this, that's the opening of something? What should they be doing over the next couple of days?
So here's one of the things that we try and think about a lot is how do we shift people from donors to owners, right? So how do we shift people from being donors to our cause to people who really feel like they own our cause? Too often the only conversation we have with people we care about the most is about money. But how can we engage them more in the mission of our organization? I think that's a really important thought for Giving Tuesday. And I think a lot of organizations who are really maximizing Giving Tuesday are using it as an on-ramp for a much bigger conversation about how they engage with people and the kinds of lives people want to lead and the kinds of statements they want to make about values. And you know, one thing I think we were really interested in was the campaign that Shot at Life did today with Bill and Melinda Gates and supported by the UN Foundation, of course. And I thought that was such an interesting example of how you're trying to bring together a very powerful kind of amplifying voice in Bill and Melinda Gates, but actually get people to focus on an issue like vaccines, which so often can be hard to get as firmly on the agenda as people would like. So I think we've learned a lot too from campaigns like Shot at Life, and I'd be interested to kind of get a sense of what you've learned from that today and what we can all learn from that kind of ambitious and really thoughtful effort.
Well, one thing, I'm glad you raised it. We were really excited here to see Bill and Melinda Gates proclaim very clearly, you know, they're big fans of Giving Tuesday for this broader conversation that it helps stimulate around the community. I loved when they said, Bill and Melinda both from their personal channels, that this could be viewed even as a doorbuster. Let's get people in giving early because it does a couple of things. It's not just about a rally or a stampede. Maybe that's what happens in some stores at times, right? But what we saw is that it created a crescendo of information and also a crescendo of confidence. I think people want to know that they're donating to a cause or something where they can be sure of how something is managed. People want data and information about how nonprofits or causes manage funds, if we're talking about donations or volunteer service. So that's what I've learned from that initiative thus far today. The doorbuster idea, the idea about getting in early and we'll match donations, really was a crescendo of confidence and of information. I think you're going to see a lot of that. By the way, I would be remiss if I didn't mention it's exciting. There's a goal of up to $200,000 that, if can be raised, will be matched, and so I think we're seeing still a lot of energy around that, and it's exciting to see as the sun moves around the Earth, or sorry, as the Earth moves around the sun, that people are seeing that conversation evolve around the United States today. I've loved seeing how people have woken up. And in their day, they have made this doorbuster idea part of what's happening from Pacific Coast all the way around the world. I also think, and I heard in the last comment, and I'd like to pose a question to you, that Matthew Bishop asked early today in one of the Hangouts. He asked about how social media in a day like Giving Tuesday, which can be a great driver but can also be a distraction for some people, what it says about giving today. And he posed that question. I thought it was a good question. I asked it a number of times, and it helped drive my thinking today. But I'd love to know how you're answering that question, Henry, when people ask you, Giving Tuesday clearly based in the social media world, how can it be a positive driver, and what are some of the lookout fors?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at its best it's about agency. Right, I think one of the things we're trying to do with social media is find ways to engage people more deeply as participants in the work that we do. Right, so this is a long way away from the previous model where you would send people a note at the end of the year and hope they'd write you a check back, and that would be the relationship you'd have with them. Social media allows you to do that, but it also allows you to do other things too, which is really get people to be ambassadors for the work that you do and engage more in the work that you do. And I think as a sector, one of the things we really need to think more about is how are we being thoughtful about engaging people as ambassadors in our work. I think that's going to be the big question with social media, because you think about it, the biggest fundraising force in the history of mankind is out there on Twitter and on Facebook, right? You see that with things like the Ice Bucket Challenge. You see it with many of the great campaigns on Giving Tuesday. Harnessing that power is going to be the key focus for a lot of nonprofits in the years ahead. And what I think is great about Giving Tuesday this year, so we've seen so many organizations who have used it as a chance to try something new, to experiment, to really think, okay, I'm going to do something different this time around. And I think that's such an important idea. We too often don't reward risk in the nonprofit sector. We too often reward consistency, right? So if it's tried and tested, it means it won't get you into trouble. But I actually think it's a really important idea. We're seeing some more ambition in the sector and a lot more creativity. And I think, again, Giving Tuesday has become a really interesting kind of science fair for people to try out new things and see what they can do.
You mentioned ambassadors, and I want to talk about that for a second, because I was talking to Zane on our team and some of the great team members that have been watching the conversation from a front row seat today. And I love the fact that there have been two presidents that have been much talked about over the last few days, right? And
I think three of them now.
Three. So I'm going to talk about two of them. I'm going to talk about President Fitz from Scandal, and how yesterday with Ellen, if you want to talk about people who can get people talking about things, and Ellen asks tough questions, and she also makes things accessible and energized. But it was exciting to see President Fitz talk about Giving Tuesday yesterday on Ellen. But President Obama, in the form of a very clear White House statement, said a lot about the movement. I'd love to get your take on that, and you tell me who's the president that I'm missing, and what are those sorts of high-level ambassadors? What does that say about the movement? What does it also portend for or mean we need to work on moving forward?
So I think one of the things we've been great is America is the most generous country in the world, right? So just recently, Charities Aid Foundation released a survey which showed that America, again, is by far the most generous country in terms of its philanthropy. So I think it makes sense that a movement like Giving Tuesday gets that kind of support. But I think it's also impressive, too, like the White House, in the case of Giving Tuesday, they've supported this idea before. I mean, we made some really, really good progress so far today in terms of capturing attention across the country. The White House believed in this idea when it was just an idea, before we had any kind of track record. So I think what's been great, I mean, certainly with the White House was their support from early on. And as to President Fitz, I'm pleased that we've got him focused on philanthropy, because I think it keeps him away from some other very serious troubles in his own White House, which will only lead him further astray. So I think philanthropy might be a useful distraction for President Fitz from his various marital problems. And as for my third president, the third president was Kid President.
Oh, that's right. Bingo, you're right. Yeah.
I suspect has higher popularity ratings of all three. And Kid President really got behind Giving Tuesday today in a big way to talk about the things he stands for and what they're all trying to do in the world. So three presidents is one short of Rushmore.
So you I think Kid President brings us to a question that I had on my list for you. You and I both have little ones in our homes, right? And they're going to grow up in a world where philanthropy means something different. Kids have been a part of the conversation. I believe you've had a lot of kids at 92Y today, by the way. I've seen some of that. It's fun to watch.
9,000 this week.
Wow. So what is the kind of, and let's get real for a minute. Let's get very personal. What's the kind of relationship you want your kids to have with philanthropy? And is there any cross-generational lesson that's come out of Giving Tuesday for you this year? Is there something that we should be thinking out as the day moves ahead?
So I think we had a conversation with our kids about we had a conversation with one of them. The younger one is 1 year old, so the conversation largely revolves around where her mother is. But the older one, he's 3. We had a conversation with him. He had a bunch of toys he'd been given for the holidays, and we had a conversation with him about which of them he'd like to give to someone who needs them more than he does. And it was really, you realise that that's when philanthropy starts. Is a conversation. He, at 3 years old, can just about understand that. He understands there are people who need things, and he understands he has a lot of things, and he can make a contribution. So I think that kind of thing, it was very meaningful for me personally, but I think it's a metaphor for something else, which is the great traditions in our world remain great traditions not because they're constantly admired, but because they're renewed. Because actually what happens is generations come along and they find new ways of renewing traditions. And I think as we think about philanthropy in general, there are so many traditions that need renewing, so many new ways people are going to need to find to engage the next generation of philanthropists who are going to expect so much more from their causes than they had in the past. There's such deeper, more personal connections. And that's a real challenge for our sector, but it's one I think people are really getting ready to answer, and a lot of the partners in Giving Tuesday, I think, are really stepping up to find new ways of engaging people in meaningful ways.
Seems to me like there's a generation that demands a lot. I mean, you talked about I love hearing you talk about from donors to owners. I wonder if this generation is going to start as owning the cause. I mean, and personalizing it and really expecting that level of leadership. You know, if I can share a quick story about something that happened in my house. I have a 9-year-old that is a force of nature. She chose 2 causes to support this year. One of them was related to the place where I work. That makes it makes a dad proud because your kid identifies with what you do. But the other one had nothing to do with where I work. And she asked me, "Why don't you work on this issue? It's so important. Why don't you do that?" And I love that she was asking me about the philanthropy where I work, about the foundation where I work, and I like that she was asking those really tough questions. I want to know why. And
I just add one thing to that. One of the things I hope Giving Tuesday has added is this time of year 3 years ago, what was the conversation anyone was having about philanthropy, right? Before Giving Tuesday was launched, this time of year was all about retail, right? It was about Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and then it kind of petered out. What's so exciting today is that there are generations of people engaging in important conversations about what they stand for and what they give to and how they volunteer and how they donate. There are people challenging each other to do more. And I think that's going to be the real promise of Giving Tuesday. We're going to hear a lot over the next 24 hours about the number of tweets and the number of dollars and the percentage of increase. And those are all important stories, and that data is meaningful. But I hope there's something else in this too, which is actually what we're really trying to do, is get a culture of giving where giving is so much more pronounced in what we talk about and how we act.
So Along those lines, I think that the dialogue clearly is ongoing, and there's going to be a lot of people who are going to ask tomorrow morning, and as the season moves forward, the giving season moves forward, what has been the impact? I think, given the spirit of Giving Tuesday and the constant learning, right? I mean, starting in January of last year, the community was learning from one another and talking with one another, et cetera. Giving Tuesday it's really at a midpoint in a lot of ways. What are some of the questions that the community didn't take up, or maybe we could take up more of? What are some of the things where you think, gosh, there's still a lot on the table to do. This is something that we should put at the top of our to-do list, meaning what do we got to do better as a community that talks about and cares about giving?
So I think the one thing Giving Tuesday, this was like everything with Giving Tuesday, all the things we learned about it, we learned from Twitter, right? So you see things people tweeting about, and someone once described Giving Tuesday as a connected learning experience. And I think there is no better way to think about what we're trying to do than throughout the year, people work on different resources and webinars that are provided by Giving Tuesday partners, which help improve them as organizations. And I include the 92nd Street Y in that. We've benefited a lot from many of the resources that people have created. So I think as we think about learning, we're going to learn a lot more about what works. We're going to learn a lot about what doesn't work. You know, and one of the great things I think about trying to create a community around giving is you'll be able to see who really did well over December and why, and you'll see why people didn't do as well. And what I hope we'll be able to do with all this is encourage a much greater culture of learning across the community, which in the years to come will mean that many great causes receive much more critical support from the work that people are doing. And it's an exciting time. I think the people involved today, and you know, we're now one and you are two of 20,000 different organizations working to think about Giving Tuesday and how we can bring this holiday alive. We're just so proud to be a part of this movement, which is really, I think, celebrating the best in what people are capable of doing.
And there's a lot of people that have made that possible, and I know that there are a lot of people who've worked really hard to get this conversation moving. It's not a conversation that would happen naturally. It takes some impulse and it takes some energy. I loved hearing Helen Clark and the message coming out from UNDP today about the global issues, and in their case, they were talking a lot about Ebola, and whether it be from our UN partners, you know, U.S. Fund for the World Food Program, or whether it be those who are supporting UNICEF. But today during the UNDP conversation, it hit me that there really was this conversation going on around the world. Before we kind of wrap up here our conversation, I'd love to get your perspective, Henry, on the global piece. What does the global piece mean? And is Giving Tuesday, what makes Giving Tuesday global in terms of what's the same, but also is there something that Giving Tuesday, Singapore, Mexico, or anywhere else taught you that we should be learning from right now?
So I think there's lots of information still coming in, but I think the big lesson we're going to learn this year is from the UK. So Giving Tuesday UK, what's been so interesting is actually obviously Thanksgiving is not well celebrated in the United Kingdom. But Cyber Monday is ramping up in a very meaningful way. And actually this year, for the first year, Black Friday and Cyber Monday were very meaningful in the UK. And because of that, the Giving Tuesday campaign really did well. So they had the Prime Minister endorse it, they had over 800 partners. And the story of Giving Tuesday today in the UK was a phenomenal one about engaging people in meaningful ways. Especially important somewhere like the UK, where actually a lot of younger people there are disengaged increasingly with philanthropy, right? The stories we're hearing there are not overall positive about that. So I think we're seeing some really interesting things happen in countries where typically you wouldn't have thought Giving Tuesday would be relevant, actually making Giving Tuesday incredibly relevant for local communities. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about that in the days and weeks to come. And I'd echo 1.2, that the story about the UN this year is such a powerful one. And our partners at UNDP, through their work, Giving Tuesday didn't just take place in some of the most fortunate places in the world. It also took place in some of the most challenged. So UNDP, who have boots on the ground in countries all over the world, there were groups volunteering, there were blood drives, there were people coming together for local communities. So Giving Tuesday this year, in one way, formed a link between the richest man on earth through to some of the most challenged places in the world. And I think that's an important idea, and we're really grateful for UNDP for all their hard work.
That story, Henry, is one of the 20,000 partners that you mentioned. They really do range. They've ranged from some of the world's wealthiest people, some of the most august and established philanthropies, to small nonprofits, to communities like the communities that we've seen, dozens of municipal communities. I still love watching what's happening in Maryland and in the city of Philadelphia. I've loved watching those communities come together. It's an amazing community because of its diversity. It would be impossible to thank everybody for everything that they've done, but I'm sure that that you have a message for that community of 20,000 and for those who support those 20,000. So what would you say as we get close to the end of our conversation? You've asked everyone to thank and have thanking being a part of their messaging, but what would you say to that partner group?
So I think we have a lot to be thankful for, right? I think that partner group has really come together and tried to learn from each other and really work hard together to get to Giving Tuesday where it is. I mean, one of the entry points for Giving Tuesday is you have to believe in something which is bigger than your own organization, right? Giving Tuesday is out there, and it's an umbrella for all of us to be a part of, and it's created, and it rises or falls based on mass participation, right? If it's just 4 organizations doing it, it's never going to get to any kind of scale. So I think we're really grateful for what people have done so far. I think what we're looking for next is a really big close to today. I think the message I would send out now as we're getting into the last hours is Giving Tuesday is ramping up still. What's really interesting is actually in the last hour we've seen a massive surge, particularly on social media, as people all over the country are seeing how big this movement is growing. So I think the next 6 hours on the East Coast, 9 hours on the West Coast, and something in between in the middle, I think those hours are going to be really critical as you actually see a surge of support around Giving Tuesday. So I'd encourage all of our partners to really think now about digging in even further and working out how we can maximize the rest of Giving Tuesday and then, of course, the rest of the holiday season. And I think the thing I finish on, Aaron, is to ask you a question, which is, I think you've run, you've quarterbacked the overarching communications strategy from the very beginning for Giving Tuesday. What would be the one big learning that you've taken from today, and what would be the one big challenge you would set for our community going forward?
The power of connectivity, and you've reminded us of this. The power of connectivity is what we saw when we had celebrity ambassadors. Let's just take that category. When they've been taking their own selfies today, not just proclaiming something or saying do something, they've been saying this is what I support and why. And it started a dialogue. So the big communications lesson for me is that there's power in dialogue. When people are saying, I support something because, and this is how I will support them, what about you? And when there's real dialogue back and forth. So I loved seeing that conversation that happened around cancer survivors earlier today. I love the conversation that happened around protecting people from domestic violence. I loved when people were honest enough to say, I support this cause because it impacted my life, plus someone I love, or it's something that I don't want to see my kids to have to suffer through. So that, for me, is real communication. Connectivity is when people are sharing, listening, and responding. That cycle is real communication. But, Henry, I'm going to give you the last word. And before I do that, though, I know this is again, you've given us a rally cry, right? We are well into the day, but there's a lot of Giving Tuesday left on the clock and in our hearts, and there's a lot left we can do in cyberspace, and there's even a lot more we can do around our dinner tables and in our workplaces of worship and work. So let's make that happen. Let's really rally it and make the conversations authentic and real. I would be inauthentic if I didn't say thank you. It's been a great day. It's been a great Giving Tuesday. I think we just got started, and I think I speak for a lot of people in saying thanks for your leadership. But with that, I'll give it over to you.
Well, thank you to everyone, especially our friends at the UN Foundation, who have been great partners to us in so many things for so many years now. And I think one of the things we look for now, I think we really need to rally people to dig in. We're going to push hard. We're pushing here hard at the 92nd Street Y to keep the campaign going. And I think as we'll begin to see a lot more of the results come in from around the country, we're going to see some really very positive stories about our community and our country's capacity to think about things that really matter. And I think that's what's beginning today. And I think beginning is an important word. We're beginning to shift the conversation around the country. It's extraordinary how far we've come in a short space of time. Imagine where we'll be in 2 years' time. Imagine where we'll be in 3 years' time, with the work of a lot of partners and a lot of people really coming together to try and think about things that truly matter. I think there's huge amounts of potential ahead. But for today, happy Giving Tuesday to everybody. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you have given. And I hope that we're going to do many great things together in the coming weeks and years.
Great. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.